I want to talk about playing through changes today. It doesn't really matter whether it's jazz or blues, the approach is still the same. A lot of people, when they're playing through changes that move or they want to go with the changes, can sometimes be fixed on the idea that you have to go with the chord. That is the general principle, that you do change with the chord. But you don't have to be militant about, on beat 1 I must play a chord turn, and on beat 3 I must play another chord turn. That kind of rigid thinking just locks you into playing very boring lines, and then you end up sort of freaking out when you can't place a chord turn on a beat. Trust me, I've been there. When I was getting into this kind of stuff as a teenager, I found it sort of hard because a lot of the literature that you would read about improvising would say, theoretically, you need to place a chord tone on beat 1, a chord tone on beat 3, and it's not always possible. And to be quite honest, if it happens all the time, lines become very predictable and a bit dull. So the main thing at the end of the day when it comes to playing changes is melody. If you have a strong melody, you can get away with a lot. And you can get away with playing notes that aren't in the chord, or aren't chord tones, or aren't even in the key. It's all about the end that justifies the means. That's something that's really, really important, is sort of knowing where you're heading. And as long as you have a good resolution at some point in the not too distant future, you can justify more or less any note that you play. So if we were to look at it in the context of, say, a jazz tune, a really good way to just get your head around playing through changes is to learn the melody. As guitar players, we've become really fixated on learning chords and playing chords, which is obviously an essential part of what we have to do to make a living, is playing rhythm guitar. And I encourage you, the song I played at the beginning was just a chorus of Blue Bossa by Kenny Dorham. I encourage you to learn the chords in all positions, because it frees up, the fretboard for you, and it gives you a whole bunch of different options when it comes to actually playing different voicings. So the chords for that song go C minor, then it goes to F minor, then you get a 2-5 back to C minor, then you get a 2-5 to D flat major, and then 2-5 back to C. But learning how to play that in different positions. The other thing is playing that melody. Like, I wasn't playing the melody then, I was just playing the chords. But when you play the melody from the actual song, or song that you're looking at, is singing what you play, and then actually not only learning it on your instrument, but learning to sing the melody while you play the chords, because then that really locks your ear into hearing what the actual scale degrees of the key that you're in are being played against the chord that you're currently holding. And you retain that memory, and then it gives you ideas that you can draw upon. A lot of early swing solos, when you hear Charlie Christian, variations of the melody, you can hear that he keeps referring to the melody, and he'll play these cool licks, and then he'll go back to playing something that is derived from the melody, and then he'll play another cool lick. And in bebop, it's a little bit more removed from that, but still at the heart of it is the melody for everything that you're doing. So I would encourage singing every single melody that you learn while playing the chords, and then do it in different keys. Because as guitar players, we get really fixated on just the keys that work well for us. E, G, A, C. But if you're going to be getting more into sort of jazz keys, you'll realize that a lot of those keys don't work so well for horn players. And as a result, you end up playing in A flat and B flat and F and E flat, which, if you're not used to on a guitar, it can be a bit of a trip, trying to sort of work out where your chords are. So if you can start putting songs into different keys and transposing them, then it just means that you will very quickly realize that they're, all of the keys, they're equal. There's no particular key that's harder than another. It's more that we as guitarists are visually reliant on looking at particular frets. So if we were to look at the beginning of Blue Bossa. It goes from chord 1, C minor, then it goes to chord 4 to F minor. Now, I know all of the notes that are going to be in those chords, so you really do have to know a certain amount of theory. And your ear will carry you through, but the theory is kind of essential. So I did a series of videos on playing over altered dominant lines. I'll do some on minor chords and on major chords as well, but the theory is that the approach, I should say, is more or less the same. Know the notes in the chord and you can fill in the gaps with the scales, you can come up with different lines, you can play over the 5. So C minor, we have C, E flat, G, B flat. Then if we have extensions, the 9th is a D, 11 is an F, and then the 13 or the 6th here, you could use it would be an A. It will give you a very European jazz sound, which I'm not so into using over this kind of cool West Coast bossa sort of thing. But again, that's just a personal taste. You could use it. There's no rule that says you can't use it. Then we get to F minor. The 1's F, the 3 is A flat, the 5 is C, the 7 is E flat, the 9 is G, the 11th is B flat, and then again, same deal, you can use the 13 or the 6, which would be a D. Personal taste. Maybe if you want that sort of dark North European sound, the Django sound, use it. Then you're going to get the 2 chord, which is a D half diminished, which you have D, F, A flat, C, and then you have G7, which sounds particularly good when turned into at least a sharp 5 chord or some kind of an altered chord. So you'd have G, B, D, F, and then you could add a flat 9, which would be an A flat. You could raise the 5th, so it could be a D sharp, and that would sound pretty hip because it resolves really well down. Now, when I'm playing over this, I don't have to come up with very complicated bebop lines. I can stick with those notes and I can arpeggiate, like what we were doing before in the creating dominant lines series of lessons. I've done 4 lessons on that. So we have 2 bars on each of those chords. And if I just stick to arpeggios with very, very simple chromatic steps between the chord tones, I could get something like this. So it sounds kind of jazzy like that. I could intensify that by really highlighting some of the strong notes. So I could have another example would be. Then goes to the 2/5. Another thing that you can do when you're playing into a chord, in this case when we're playing to an F, you can play a line derived from the 5 of the chord you're going to. So it means I could turn my C minor into a C7 or a C altered chord. I would usually do this maybe like 2 beats before I arrive at the chord I want to get to. Otherwise it can sound a bit strange when you're playing a line over a chord that isn't actually being played. So this is what I would be hearing in my head when it comes to the chord progression. That's not what's written in the chart. The chart would just be C minor 7 until you get to F minor 7. So you could put that in your playing. You could have that was the whole sort of first 8 that I played through there. But what I did in that first transition to F is I just played some very simple minor stuff. So that's just going up. I mean, it's more or less just blues scale with an added 9th. Then I want to turn the C into a C diminished or C7 flat 9 chord because that's going to resolve perfectly. Like that. So I played good old bebop. Resolves to the 3rd of the F. Get that very strong resolution. And then the line that I played there, I went to the 3rd, jumped down to the 5th and did a 5 flat 5, then 9 and then to tonic. So with this one chromatic note that I added, it was largely diatonic. So I had and I'm not thinking about like really crazy bebop lines. If you're going to be playing double time stuff, that's when you really need to think about coming up with interesting chromatic lines and playing over chords that aren't actually being played, because you've got to come up with 16th notes. So 16 notes a bar, and that's a lot of time to fill. But when it comes to this stuff here, and you're not locked into a set rhythmic grouping, you don't have to play straight eighth notes. You can have pauses and that. It's the melody. And the melody is that really strong thing that just carried it through. Then we would get to the next part, which is the 2-5, and I would think about the notes in that I want to hear, plus any note I want to use to fill. I don't have to use notes from a Locrian scale. If I don't want to, I can use, I could use those notes if I wanted to, because my destination was that F. By the time I get to the G altered chord, so I might go. So I'm building off a motive. Motives are really, really important. And Bruce Forman, the fantastic American jazz guitar player, talks about the importance of motives. There's a great video of him playing All the Things You Are and playing and talking about motives, and he actually articulates the motives he's playing while he's doing it live, which is really, really useful. This one here, I'm just going up the arpeggio, and then that ends on a C. When I get to the G7 chord, the third of that chord is a B, so I'm now a semitone away, and I can do exactly the same thing, like that. I mean, both of these are kind of just extensions of the same sort of chord, because remember the 2 is the same as the 5, and I do what's called a 3 to 9 arpeggio here, which means that I end a semitone away from the note that is going to be the 5th of the C. So that whole intro part, you should hopefully be able to hear the chord changes without me playing chords. And ultimately that's the goal as an improviser, is to be able to outline what chords are without doing basic, basic arpeggios, so that people can follow what you're doing. So I think we had like that. And singing it is really, really important. When I'm doing this improvising, I wasn't doing it then when I was on camera, but when I'm doing this as an exercise, or even when I'm playing live, I hear it in my head. I'm not just intellectualizing and looking at notes that I know on the fretboard and thinking about the theory. In fact, all of this theory that I've been talking about in this lesson, it doesn't cross my mind at all when I'm playing. I know it, I've spent years studying it, and when I'm practicing it's very useful, but in the moment of actually improvising on a gig or in a jam session, it's irrelevant. In the same way that most people, when conversing in any language, are not thinking about the grammar and syntax and punctuation of their language. They're just articulating what it is they want to say. So you don't need to get too hung up on, this is all of the theory I need to know, it's so much theory. Follow your ear, and in your own time chip away the theory, because it helps you understand songs, it helps you learn songs, it helps you approach improvising over things. But once you become familiar with those chord progressions, you don't have to be so caught up in thinking about the theory. So this can be applied, this approach, to any chord progression. Blues would be a good one, and I'll do a video on playing over a blues. But I would just encourage you to start initially with the arpeggios, see how you can link them, even if that means going in eighth notes, just going. Adding some scale notes. And some chromatic approach lines. just a whole chorus there of blue bossa using eighth notes. That, again, wasn't probably the most interesting melody you've ever heard, but it outlined the changes, and hopefully you could at least hear that the chords were changing even if you couldn't pick the tonality. And it's a really good backbone. So when I'm playing, I can kind of hear like an outline of the chord progression at all times, like that I can tap into, and there would be a double time one that I could tap into as well. And I just choose to pick whatever notes I want to come up with a stronger melody. And sometimes I will deliberately hold a note that doesn't belong in a chord. And I love that sound when you land on one and you might have a suspension like that, because music's all about tension and release. So if you withhold the resolution on a really strong beat and then deliver the resolution at the right time, it's a masterful way of controlling the tension and release in your lines, and ultimately that will translate to the audience, and that's what you see when you hear master improvisers, and they're not unique to a particular genre. You know, Miles Davis is one, Charlie Parker, Robin Ford, Josh Smith, the list goes on of fantastic players who do this in their own way. And I don't want to speak for them, but I wouldn't be surprised if they all just think about melodies and they don't actually get caught up in the theory so much of what's happening. So I'll do some more videos on this stuff, and we'll look at different chord progressions and different ways of approaching things. But the main thing is memorize the chords and the chord progression and be able to visualize them at different parts of the fretboard. Learn the melody from the song that you're playing, if it is a song with a melody, unlike, say, a blues. Or if it is an instrumental blues, learn the melody. And then break it down into chunks. Just do 2 or 4 bars at a time. Really getting to know the sort of skeletal outline of those chords. And then if you end on a chord tone of one chord, what's the nearest chord tone of the next chord? Can you link them with a chromatic line? Can you link them with a chromatic approach line or an enclosure? Once you can do that on a purely harmonic level, is there anything interesting that you can do rhythmically to spice it up a little bit? And then try and do that in all the different 5 positions. Remember, they've got that cage system, so it's a really good way of breaking up. Most of what I did for you today was just here out of what's called the E position. Again, I have a video on the cage system that goes through and breaks these down, so check that out. If you think this video is going to help anybody, please share it around. I'm just here to demystify things for guitar players, because there's a lot of confusion out there once you step away from pentatonics. And it's an incredibly rewarding thing to go beyond pentatonics, but it can be kind of scary and confusing if that's what you choose to do. So please share this around with others. Give us a like. You know, I'm on Instagram at the Rev Dr. Z, and YouTube, Facebook, and shoot me a comment or a question if you want to know anything about like the theory behind this stuff. Okay, take it easy and see you next time.